Hi, everyone. Welcome to Selling to Healthcare. I'm Lisa Miller. I've spent over 30 years in healthcare sales, from building lasting partnerships to driving real results for hospitals and health systems. And I'm here to share what I've learned about leading with service and how that can change the game for you, no matter where you are in your career. So today I want to talk about something that I've been, thinking about a lot lately, and it's something I feel really strongly about. And it's the evolution from value selling to what I'm calling decision-led selling. Because, I think for more than 20 years now, value selling has been like the dominant philosophy in professional sales, right? And there's entire methodologies, certifications, books, training programs, all built around this one idea. And the idea is, if you can clearly articulate value in terms that matter to the buyer, deals are going to close, margins are going to hold, and you're going to build long-term relationships. And look, in a lot of environments, that idea has proven true. I mean, it's real. Value selling works, right? Look, value is never going away, right? That's not what I'm saying. But if you look at how big deals actually move forward today, the process has changed, the people involved, the politics, it's a whole different landscape. So here's what I keep seeing, and I think a lot of you are probably seeing this too, despite, widespread adoption of value selling frameworks. Enterprise deals continue to stall late, and sales cycles just keep stretching, and executive sponsorship starts to weaken. And, the thing that really gets me is buyers will agree that something is valuable and still do nothing. Like, they'll look at you and say, yeah, this is great, this makes total sense, and then just nothing happens. And I think that gap, right, that's not about execution. I think it's a signal that value selling, as it's commonly taught, just doesn't fully map to how modern decisions actually get made. And so the way I've been thinking about it is, value selling's necessary. It's just no longer sufficient. So I want to be clear about where value selling really shines, right? Because I don't want to dismiss it. At its core, value selling teaches you to shift the focus away from features and price and toward outcomes and impact and return. And done well, it really elevates the seller from being a vendor to being a real business partner. And books like The Power of Value Selling by Julie Thomas, I think they reflect the best of that evolution. They're all about, putting the customer at the center, building trust, real human connection, and making sure everything ties back to business relevance. And they help sellers compete on value instead of just discounting. They protect margin and improve the quality of your conversations. I mean, all of that is really, really important. But this is where I think it starts to fall short, right? And it's not in explaining value, it's in navigating choice. So think about it this way, right? Modern buyers, especially senior executives, they're not short on valuable options, and they're drowning in them. Every single initiative that gets presented to an executive is framed as strategic and urgent and high impact. I mean, digital transformation, cost containment, growth acceleration, risk mitigation, talent enablement, innovation, compliance. They all show up prepackaged as value. And so executives, they rarely ask whether something is valuable. They ask whether it deserves priority. And I think that's a really, really important distinction. So value selling answers the question of, is this worth it, right? But it doesn't answer the question of, should we do this before everything else? And that matters because, enterprise decisions aren't made in isolation, right? They're made in environments defined by limited attention and political capital and internal resistance and reputational risk. And I think like an executive can believe in the value of a solution, like fully believe in it, and still decide not to act because the internal cost of championing it just feels too high. And I think, traditional value selling kind of assumes this linear path from value recognition to purchase. But in practice, the most dangerous part of the sales process happens after value is agreed upon, and that's where deals quietly die. So this is where decision-led selling comes in, right? And it emerges precisely at that point where value selling kind of leaves off. Decision-led selling is the evolution of value selling into the discipline of guiding how decisions are made, not just why something is valuable. And I think that's, a fundamental shift in how we think about the seller's role. Because once value is established, the work is no longer persuasion, right? The work is enablement. So in decision-led selling, you lead with decision context rather than solution merit, right? The focus moves upstream to understanding what else is competing for executive attention, what risks the buyer is managing, and what internal dynamics are going to determine whether a decision actually survives scrutiny beyond that meeting. That reframes the seller's role from value messenger to decision partner. And I think that's huge. Okay, let me talk about risk for a minute, because I think this is, one of the core limitations of value selling and something I feel really strongly about. Value selling tends to frame risk in economic or performance terms, right? Like, will the solution deliver the promised outcomes? Will the return justify the investment? And those are important questions, But executives, I think they think about a completely different kind of risk, like political risk and organizational risk and reputational risk. And they're asking questions that, rarely surface in sales conversations, like who's going to push back on this? Which peers are going to feel disrupted? What happens if this fails publicly? What initiatives does this displace? Who owns the fallout if it goes wrong? I think, from my experience selling into hospitals, I can tell you this is so real. I mean, the hospital CFO might look at your solution and say, yeah, this saves us money. This is a great idea. But what they're really thinking about is who's going to push back on this internally? Am I picking the right partner? What's my exposure if this doesn't work? And decision-led selling brings those questions into the open rather than hoping they just resolve themselves, right? Because, avoiding complexity doesn't make it disappear. I think addressing it is what builds trust. And there's another piece here that I think is really, really important. And it's, I'd call it like the portability of the story, right? Can your narrative travel without you? So, sellers are trained to present value convincingly in the room. And that's great, but executives need a story they can repeat when you're not there, right? Like in board meetings and peer discussions and downstream leadership conversations. And if that value story can't travel, the decision can't survive. Like it's that simple. So decision-led selling focuses on helping executives articulate a simple, defensible decision narrative, right? Like, why does this initiative matter now? Why does it deserve priority over other valuable options? Why does this approach and this partner make sense? And I think that narrative coherence, that's often the difference between momentum and stall. And I want to be really clear about something, right? Decision-led selling doesn't abandon selling, it elevates it. So you're not just looking for a yes, right? You're looking for real commitment, and you're not just trying to close, you're helping that executive actually carry this thing through the organization. And I think in this model, value is what gets you in the door, right? But it's not the end game. Decision-led selling assumes you already know how to sell value, and that matters. But the hardest part of the sale isn't convincing the buyer. It's helping them choose and align and actually move forward. And I think this evolution reflects, a broader shift in modern enterprise environments, right? Complexity has gone up, decisions are moving slower, accountability is more intense, and the cost of, visible failure has just gone up dramatically. the sellers who win aren't the ones who explain value best, right? They're the ones who make decisions feel obvious and defensible and safe to champion. So, okay, I want to get practical here because I think, you probably sit there going, all right, Lisa, like, how do I actually do this, right? How do I help an executive move a decision through their organization? I've got, 5 things that I think are really important here. And these come from my experience working with hospitals and health systems for over 2 decades. So the first one is help them clarify the decision, not just the initiative. And I think this is where, a lot of people miss the mark. I mean, what executives need is a clear statement of what's being decided and why it matters now, right? And when the decision itself is fuzzy, alignment just breaks down. And I think the sellers who help sharpen that decision frame for executives, they're giving them something concrete, something they can actually take back and socialize internally. Second is surface internal resistance before it appears. And this one is, I think, so important. Executives know where friction is going to show up, right? They know where the pushback is, but they rarely name it in sales meetings. So ask where pushback is likely to come from, what teams are going to feel disrupted, what concerns are going to surface late. And, when you address resistance early, it lowers risk and it builds trust. I mean, I've seen this so many times in healthcare. When you name the friction, executives actually relax because they realize you understand their world. Next is help them prioritize against competing initiatives. And this is, I think, where most decisions actually stall, right? It's not that they don't see the value, it's that they're competing with other valuable efforts. So help executives articulate why this initiative deserves attention now versus later. And that's about timing and trade-offs, not value proof, right? It's a really different way to engage. Fourth is give them a repeatable narrative. And this, goes back to what I was saying about the story being able to travel without you. And I think executives need a simple, defensible story they can repeat to peers and boards and teams, right? Not a pitch, a rationale, like why now, why this approach, and why this partner. If that story can't travel without you, the decision's just not going to move. And fifth is reduce the perceived cost of sponsorship. And I think this one gets overlooked a lot. Executives evaluate how much political capital and personal risk a decision requires, right? That's just the reality. So help them see how the decision can be staged or tested or contained. And when you lower their exposure, action feels safer. And that can be the difference between, a deal that moves and one that just sits there. And, I think when all of these pieces come together, it really does change things. You stop being the person who just explains why your solution matters. You are the one helping the whole decision get unstuck. And that shift from getting agreement to creating real momentum, that's what this whole thing is about. So, the question going forward is not whether value matters. It does, right? The question is whether you're equipped to operate where value alone no longer moves decisions forward. I mean, at this point, executives expect value, right? That's table stakes. And the real question is, how can you help them move the decision throughout their organization? And I think helping them do that requires a shift from selling the solution to enabling the decision. If you want to go deeper on any of this, I've linked some great resources in the show notes, including the best value selling methodologies for enterprise leaders and more on selling to healthcare. So definitely check those out. As always, there's some free resources and my paid program is linked there too if you want some extra help getting started. That's it for this episode of Selling to Healthcare. I'm Lisa Miller. I'll be back next week with more strategies to help you sell smarter and stand out. Until next time.